Hi, Phil.
Hello.
Great to meet you. Maybe
Me too.
give us a quick introduction. Like, who are you? What have you done? What are you doing now?
Well, I was born in what used to be the Soviet Union in Russia. In when we my parents and I left in when I was 8 years old to make it to the U.S. I'm a programmer. I'm a former VC, and I'm currently on my fifth startup because apparently I can't demonstrate learning behavior. So right now I am the CEO of All Turtles, and mhm.
What is doing?
Well, our goal is to basically get people past the idea that being on video is a poor substitute for something in person. I think most people's first experience of being on video was Zoom, probably during COVID. Everyone has seen a lot of videos before, but most people never really appeared on videos on a regular basis. And so I think most people's idea about video is that it's kind of this boring, tiresome thing that isn't as good as being in person, that it's a poor substitute. Maybe you do it when you can't be in person. And of course, that's a very, I think, uninteresting way of thinking about it. Actually, video gives you new communication superpowers. Video lets you do things that you couldn't do before. It's a fundamental transformation of communication. And it's not a substitute for being in person. It's something that you can decide. And things that are better in person, you should do in person. And things that are better on video, you should do on video. So helps you be really good at video.
How did you come up with the product or the idea? It's like I really loved it when I tried it out the first time.
Thanks. Well, it started as a joke in May of 2020. So basically, we had a company, All Turtles, which is a product studio. We worked on a few different projects, and in March of 2020, we all closed down our offices and went fully distributed. So we had offices in excuse me, in San Francisco, in Tokyo, and Paris, and we decided to go fully distributed at the beginning of COVID. And for the first couple of months of that, it was it was pretty scary. I think most of us were scared. We didn't know like what was going to happen. But by May, a couple of months had passed, and like every day wasn't so terrifying. It was just kind of boring. Like every meeting was slow and tedious, and every presentation was bad. And so we just started playing around. We just started goofing around, doing jokey little things on video, just as a way to like make some people laugh. So it started as a joke, but kind of snowballed pretty quickly from that into a real product.
So how did you find your first customers? You were probably dog fooding yourself, but how did you get into the first of your first like customers or the?
I mean, I think in general, if you have to ask that question, it's like most startups that have a product, if they really have to worry about how to get the first customers, it's probably not that interesting a product. We just put it out there, and we wanted to do a closed beta, a private beta. So we released it we listed on July 7th. So we started the company on May 27th, and then we took 42 days. That's 42 is a good number to make a beta. And our goal was to do it very quietly. We just wanted, a few hundred people a day to join us. So we would do a statistically significant test to see if the product was increasing, and then we'd keep it in closed beta for a few months until we were confident. And we originally thought, we were going to keep it secret. Like we were going to ask people in the beta to not talk about it. But then we thought, well, it's a communication tool, and like asking people to test your communication tool and not talk about it seemed, like awkward, kind of an asshole thing to do. Yeah. So we decided. So I made a video, and we did one article in Verge about it that just said, "Hey, here's this closed beta," and I think it just really hit a nerve. We had everyone back then in July of 2020 was bored sitting at home. So I think we had a huge amount of demand. I think we had something like 100,000 people sign up in the first, week or two. And it went from there.
Okay, so how do you want to evolve? Like from like it's a communication tool. Do you see other appliances where you could use it well, or do you want to go that route like until there's nothing left to explore?
Yeah, I think human communication is broad enough category that I think we can stay in it and stay pretty happy and pretty productive for a long time. The world right now feels like it's going through a bigger change than in any other period that I've ever lived through. This is when I started my first startup. It was called Engine 5, and it was back in the late 90s. It was 1997. And then the big transformation was .com. Like, it was the commercial internet. Everything was getting connected to the internet, and everyone ran around saying .com. And that felt like a very big change of the world. And then Evernote was 10 years later, 2007, 2008. And the big change in the world was mobile. Like, everyone was starting to have a smartphone, and everyone ran around saying mobile and what's your mobile strategy. And that changed the world. And this feels like a much bigger change than the mobile revolution, or even the internet revolution. And by what I mean is the change that, for the first time ever, several 100 million people already today can make a decision about how to live and how to work. And those two things don't have to be connected. And that's already a few 100 million people right now. And over the next decade, it's probably going to go to about 2 billion people. They can decide where they want to live and how they want to live separately from what their career is. That's never been possible before in human existence. And that change of distributed teams, distributed work and life, is profound. It's the most profound thing I've ever lived through. And it's going to change the fabric of how we structure society. It's going to change everything from education and healthcare and productivity and working and entertainment and food and literally everything. And so I think, and this was all on the way of happening, but COVID definitely accelerated. Like, COVID made it happen right now. It probably brought it 10 years into the future. And, we just want a seat at the table. We want to be one of the companies that gets to decide and invent what this new world is going to be, and how is it going to be better than the previous world we're replacing.
Mm-hmm. So like, video and playing with video is like, I experience as a very, really playful and fun thing. From where do you want to branch out into like more productivity, or more like replace what is out there, like with maybe even a competitor like Zoom? Like, do you have any ideas onto how to like expand your product horizontally or vertically? What's your strategy on that one?
Yeah, I think when we started out, which is, it's only a year ago. Like, it's literally a 1-year-old company, so it's still very, very early days. But when we started out, we were basically the thing that sat between Keynote and Zoom. So if you wanted to present in Zoom, you would like make some slides in Keynote or PowerPoint, and you would present it in Zoom, and we kind of fit in the middle to like make it a little bit more interesting, so that you can show slides behind you and fly around and do all that kind of stuff. And that was a very interesting niche, but it's very small. And we kind of thought, okay, our biggest strategic vulnerability is we can't be the thing that sits between, two other apps. We have to break out of this box. And so we did a lot of work in breaking out of the Keynote or PowerPoint box, basically saying, well, the way that you make slides right now with these existing tools is pretty bad. So we have our own way to make content directly in So now the vast majority of usage of is content that's created in it. And then the next step is to break out of the Zoom box, to say, people shouldn't experience entirely inside of Zoom or Google or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams or WebEx or whatever. You should do it just as a first party, just experience it with multiple people using. So we're launching, we announced a bunch of these features and demoed them in the past 2 months. We did this event called Summer, where we demoed everything that was coming, and it was pretty mind-bending. You should come to our website and just look at some of the keynotes we did. And yeah, the next step is, I think a year from now, the majority of usage in the product is going to be outside of third-party apps like Zoom and Hangout. It's just going to be by itself. Right now, it's still mostly inside of, it's a companion app to video systems.
Okay, thanks. So how is the current process of like enhancing the product? Is it like something you have the idea where you want to go? Like, we want to get out of want to replace one of the the peoples we are now companion, or is it that you also got feedback from customers that telling you, I need this, I need that?
Well, I mean, both. I think in general, startups get a lot of really bad advice, including in places like this, including probably from me sometimes, maybe often. But the general advice that I think is really wrong most of the time for startups is that you need to talk to customers. I think startups spend way too much time talking to customers. And they're not even customers at first, right? If they're not paying you to use your product, they're not really customers, or just maybe you hope they're going to become customers one day. So there's a lot of talking, probably more than you need. One way I think about it is if you are, if you want to sell your product, what has to happen? If you're trying to sell your product to a person or to a company, whatever, B2B, B2C, doesn't really matter. It's kind of similar. Take the example of like me personally. When I make personal decisions to buy something, like when I decide to buy something, two things have to happen. There's really two people that live in my head. There's a guy that lives in my head who gets really excited about things. His job is to get excited about things and to say yes to things. And if he sees like a new product and he's excited about it, he's like, yes, we should buy that product. And if he doesn't get excited, then he doesn't say anything. He just stays quiet. There's another guy in my head whose job is to like be reasonable and be conservative and say no to things. And if he finds a reason to say no to something, if he finds a good reason to not buy something, then he'll say, no, we shouldn't get it. And if he doesn't find a reason to say no, then he won't say anything. He'll just shut up. And so in order for me to decide to buy something, the guy in my head that says yes has to get excited and say yes. And the guy who says no has to stay quiet. And it's the same thing, obviously, if you're trying to sell to a company. In that case, usually it's literally separate people, right? There's usually somebody or some people in the company that you're trying to sell to that are like your champions, that are saying like, yes, we need to get this. They're excited. And then there's other people whose job is to say no, and they're looking for reasons to say no. They're looking for reasons to not adopt your product. Oh, it doesn't fit with our IT structure, something, too expensive, whatever, not enough security. So in order to make the sale, you got to get the people inside of the company who say yes to say yes, and the people who say no to shut up. So the question is like, okay, well, what causes somebody to say yes and what causes somebody to say no? And I think the most common mistake is people assume that those are like the flip side, they're like the same thing, but they're not. They're actually almost completely unrelated. The features that make somebody, for an early product, for a startup, fall in love with it and say yes are like the unexpected features that delight them. They didn't know that they needed this. They didn't know how good it was going to be, how powerful it was going to be until they started using it. The reasons that make people say no are usually the things they expect when you don't deliver, certain table stakes, things they expect. So the reasons people say yes and the reasons people say no are not the same reasons. They're actually totally different. So as a startup, which, we're only a year old, your question is like, how do we prioritize features? Well, we can spend some time working on the features that make people say yes. And we can spend some time working on features that people say no. But here's the thing, if you talk to customers or prospective customers, which bucket of features are they going to tell you about? They're only ever going to tell you about the no features because they don't know the yes features. If you ask people ahead of time, like what they want, they can't imagine this like great, amazing thing that they're going to fall in love with that's going to revolutionize their life or their business. They can't do that. They're not product designers. Well, they're just going to tell you all the things that would make them say no if you don't have it. So then if you go and build all those things, so you do customer interviews ahead of time and you collect a list and you say, okay, well, we need to have single sign-in and we need to have this, this kind of compliance and it needs to support administrator controls and it needs to do this and it needs to do that and it needs to do that. You make this long list and then you go and you implement all that stuff. They're still not going to buy it because now the guy who says no, maybe is going to stay quiet, but like you haven't made anything exciting for the people to say yes. So the key for startup feature prioritization is to spend as much time as possible focusing on the things that are going to make a customer say yes, get excited. And you will never hear about those things from a customer because those are the unexpected things. That's your job as the founder and the product creator to figure out. And then you have to spend as little time as possible, but not nothing, not zero, but as little time as possible working on having the minimum set of things that's going to prevent people from saying absolutely not, no. So that's kind of the balance. So do we talk to customers? Of course, we want to understand them. but it's not like we're like collecting requirements. The vast majority, 90% of the requirements of the designs are coming from us. But as we get older, as we get more mature, in the next couple of years, that balance is going to shift until more and more is coming from, directly from observing customers. Sorry for a very long answer, but it's a pretty good question.
It's probably like you founded Evernote, and you probably went through that as well, and it totally makes sense with that perspective that you initially, when you're young, you just like have hunches and great ideas, and eventually, when the product maybe solidifies, that you do that. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. You just mentioned that you created right into like the heavy COVID time with lockdown and all that, and that you had offices and that you went to distributed teams. It's like, how did you need to change your processes while product development? Did you change the process like of product development during that time when going fully distributed?
Of course, yeah. Well, so the company was started during COVID. So was born fully distributed. We never had an office. All Turtles, which was the product studio that came out of, and several other projects came out of All Turtles. That's what we had to change. So we went fully distributed. We had to change absolutely everything. But it's much better. The change in thinking, I think that's like really key for me, is when I'm able to shift my thinking from how do you solve some kind of a problem, how do you make the best of a bad situation, which is a very natural way of thinking about this. And when I switch from that to, okay, what are the massive advantages of this new reality, and how do I get more out of the advantages? It kind of changes everything. So, in the beginning, when we all had to go and start working from home, obviously we were trying to just like get back to the previous reality as much as we could with video and that kind of stuff. But within a few weeks, within probably 2 months, we moved on from that. We said, well, we don't want to go back to the way things were, because, the way things weren't that great. We want to go forward to the way things should be. So we're not looking at this as like a limited period of time where we have to like somehow manage to do, well, it's not as good as it used to be, but maybe we can kind of recapture some of what we had. We thought instead, all right, how do we just double down? How do we do as much as possible in this new reality? What are the massive new superpowers that we get by being a fully distributed team? And there's lots. There's like many, many, many superpowers that you can't have if you're not fully distributed. And of course, there's also problems. There's also weaknesses. But I think 80% of the time focused on the superpowers and how to get as many of them as possible is the important thing. So yeah, we changed just about everything, but we didn't do it but we did it happily. We were happy to have the opportunity to change everything and try to go forward towards the way things should be, not try to recapture the way things were.
Have you made mistakes by going like fully distributed and
I have never made a mistake.
Okay.
It's all mistakes. Everything is a mistake. Obviously, like every single thing is mistakes. You just make mistakes and you just try to like calibrate. Nothing's ever right.
But let me rephrase. Like, is there any experience you would like to share to a founder? Like, please go fully distributed, but do this because it does not make sense that you do it otherwise. Any tips?
Yeah, many. But I think and I'll give you some tips. But I think it's actually important to understand that the framing of that question is part of the problem. And this is the most natural way to think about it, is the way that you're asking. Like, it's the emphasis on the problems. Humans have a very strong negativity bias, a very strong cognitive negativity bias. Basically, like if you're trying to look smart in front of your friends, your coworkers, your board members, it's much easier to look smart if you're critical, if you're pointing out the problems, if you're saying, oh, but this is going to be harder and this is going to be harder and this is a problem. If you're criticizing, this is just normal human nature. And the more people that are in a room together, like making a decision, the more conservative and negative the general tone is going to be, because, like, let's say you have a decision to make and you gather your management team and you say, okay, we're considering this. And then you go, what do you think? And you go around the table, and every person, like the first person is going to be like, well, I see the opportunity, but we have to consider this risk and this risk and this risk and this risk. And then the next person is going to need to like be even more negative than the first person. So they're going to be like, yes, but also this thing is a problem, and this thing is a problem, and this thing is a problem. And you're going to keep going around the room, and it's just going to pile in to negativity and problems and problem solving instead of the amazing advantages and superpowers. Because this is just human psychology. This is human nature. You sound smarter when you're being negative than if you're being positive. If, on the other hand, you say, what do you think? And it's my turn, and I say, oh, it's amazing. This is going to be great, and this is going to be great, and I'm really excited about that. And I don't list any problems, then like I seem like a dope. I seem like some kind of, happy American that doesn't understand how complicated the real world is. So it's always useful to some extent to think about problems and give tips to solving them, but it's more useful to talk about the superpowers that aren't problems. They never existed before. They're new things that you have now. So for example, I'll just give you one example of the superpower. It's amazing to me that people don't talk more about this. 0% of the people who work at our companies, spend time commuting. Nobody, right? 0% of the employees waste time commuting. And they never will again. And this is amazing. And this isn't like imagine if somehow this was like a magic in the world. We're like in an alternate reality Earth. This is parallel Earth. And let's just say somehow magically my company always had this. Like no one ever wasted time commuting. That's just the way it was. Somehow, I don't know how it happened. And then, I walk into the office one day because, on alternate Earth, we still have offices, even though no one commutes. Let's say new technology, everyone can just teleport in, 0 time wasted commuting. And I walk into the office one day and I say, and no one's ever wasted time commuting. They say, hey, I have a new management idea. Gather around, everyone. I'm going to need all of you to waste 2 hours every day sitting in traffic. And yes, I know that it's not productive because you can't do any work while you're sitting in traffic. And yes, you can't be with your family and your friends. And yes, it's very stressful and unhealthy and you're breathing in a lot of bad smoke. And oh my God, it's terrible for the environment and for the world. But CEO decision, everyone has to waste 2 hours every day sitting in traffic. Go ahead. All right? Like the board would fire me immediately. The board would be like, well, the CEO's gone crazy, and I'd be fired. But like, okay, we're asking people to do that if you're asking them to go back to the office. So why aren't we like more focused on this amazing gift that just a small gift, which is 2 hours every single day that you don't have to do this really unhealthy, unpleasant, unproductive, horrible for the world thing. But no one ever asks about that. Everyone asks about, oh, but what are the challenges? What are the problems? And that traffic thing, that's just one of like 100 benefits that you get. So yeah, okay. So my tip for how to solve problems is get rid of as many synchronous meetings as possible. So the most precious thing in the world is, imagine a pyramid. The most precious thing in the world at the very top of the pyramid, it's very scarce, there's very little of it, is in-person synchronous communication. Is if multiple people are physically in the same space at the same time doing something. That is precious, that can never be scaled. That is a very finite resource. So whenever you're doing that, actually being in the same physical space at the same time with other people, it has to be something really special. Like it has to be something that like is really meaningful. It's important. You couldn't do it any other way because like you can never get that time back. It has to be like going to a good restaurant with your friends. It's like one of the few things that actually makes sense to do like synchronously, same place, same time. You have to make the most of it. You should never like waste that time. You should never feel like I just sat in a room. I just had to travel somewhere and to sit in a room for something. And man, that was a waste of time. Like that is a tragedy if you did that. So most important thing, right, is in-person synchronous. Second most important thing right under it is what we're doing now, which is synchronous. So at the same time, but online. So we're in different places. I'm in Arkansas, but we're talking at the same time. And this is still very non-scalable. It's still very precious. It's a little bit easier than having to like go to the same place, but it's still pretty scalable. So you should only do this for real conversations, for like important stuff. 80% of everything you do in your team, in your company, should be in the bottom of the pyramid, which is asynchronous. You shouldn't be doing it at the same time. You should be like anything that involves transferring information should be done asynchronously. You should, instead of talking, instead of having a meeting, you should make a video, make a recording, send it around, get feedback. That's one of the major things that you can use for. And it frees up massive amounts of time, and it helps everyone be productive in every time zone, fully distributed. So I kind of have a test for this, a mental test for what meeting should be synchronous versus asynchronous, which I call the face hole test. And it was like this: if you watch a few people interacting, like we're doing now, and you notice that one person is moving their face hole a lot for like many minutes at a time, and nobody else is moving their face holes, everyone else is like kind of like what's happening now, it probably shouldn't be a synchronous communication, because that's not a conversation, that's a lecture. That would probably be better if it was recorded ahead of time and sent around. If you're having a synchronous conversation, then what has to happen is one person moves their face hole for like a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, and then somebody else moves their face hole. And then it's a conversation, then it's okay to do online. So having said that, I'm going to stop moving my face hole so you can move yours.
And maybe this is a good transition into the questions and answers where people can interact with you. So I have one question from the audience, from Alex. It's like, hi Phil, can you already see difference in user behavior in terms of your main markets in North America, Europe, and Asia?
Not really. This is another question that we got all the time at Evernote because Adam, already, I think only 40% of our users are US. That's already 60% everywhere else in the world. At Evernote, it was, I think 75% was outside the US, about 25% was in the US. And we really believe this from day one, like just, make it everywhere, make it global. Not for every kind of product, but for the kind of products we make, of course it should be global. So we're actually about to launch in 12 languages. Right now we're just English and Japanese, but we're about to launch in 12 languages in the next few weeks, like fully global. And every time people would ask back at Evernote, because we had hundreds of millions of users fully global, like, oh, what's the difference between your users and, if I wasn't giving a talk in Turkey, they would say, what's the difference between the Turkish users and everywhere else? Or what's the difference between the Brazilian users and everywhere else? Or are people using it differently in China? And it's kind of an interesting question, but it's not that interesting, because actually more interesting is what are the similarities? And this again comes down to a way that we are taught to understand things in Western civilizations, that I think is like an okay way to understand things, but it has its limits. So when I was in high school, I don't know, 15 or 14 or something like that, probably 15 or 16 years old, we had to, in a biology class, we had to dissect frogs. So, we had to cut frogs apart. I think people still do that, and probably different in different countries. So we had to cut frogs apart to learn about frogs and to cut them apart. And, you can learn a little bit about frogs by cutting them apart. But then a few years ago, I had this experience where I took a trip down through the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. And I was just there for a couple of weeks, and I got to spend a lot of time with frogs. And you can learn a lot more about frogs by not cutting them apart, by just actually watching them when they're in one piece, interacting. I feel like I have a significantly better understanding of frogs now after having interacted with them than I did by slicing them apart. But the slicing things apart is a core way in the West of how we are taught to understand things. So we ask questions about differences. How is B2B different from B2C? How are users in the US different from the users in China? Slice, 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 slice. Segment, 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 segment. What's your persona? What's this? Everything is taught to be separate. Understand things by cutting them apart and understanding each small thing. And that's useful, but you lose so much. You lose so much from the big picture by doing that. So I would turn that question around and say, how interesting is it that our usage in the US is actually very similar to our usage globally? Why is that? Because life is different in different countries. Why is the product usage similar? Do we want that? What can we learn about that? So it's not that different yet. We're still very young, but I'm actually more interested in the similarities than the differences anyway.
Cool. There's another question from Dominic. You mentioned not talking to customers much. If you don't talk to them or observe them, how do you figure out which features would delight them?
Well, I think those are two different things, talk and observe. So I think it's really important that you not build anything in the company for people that you don't inherently understand. You really have to understand the lives of the people who are your target customer base. This is critically important. And ideally, you should understand these people well before you started your company. Because like, why would you put yourself on such a constrained timeline to learn? Why not start a company or make a product for people that you already, before you started it, feel like you have this like really deep, visceral understanding. So of course you have to understand the target audience. And you can do a little bit of that by observing, as if they were frogs in the Amazon, better than cutting them open. Don't cut your customers open. But really, like, you've had your whole life to understand these people, and you chose to make a company and a product for people that you don't quite understand. That's maybe a mistake. So there's two ways to really understand a customer base. There's a way to cheat, and there's a way to not cheat. The way to not cheat is to make sure that you've got founders, co-founders that have like already spent a big part of their life understanding this community. Like, they should already know this stuff. And then of course you can like refine understanding a little bit after you started the company. But for the most part, you just need to have founders that already deeply understand the problems of the community you're trying to solve. And then when you talk to customers, you're not asking them for like ideas for how to solve problems. You're not asking them for feature suggestions. That's useless. You've understood them before you started the company. You, because of your understanding of the problems before you started the company, have designed a product. You put the product in front of customers, and then you talk to them and you ask them one thing. You ask them, here is this product. Please show me how you use it to solve this problem and this problem and this problem. And so you're talking to customers by getting them to react to something that you've already given them in order to make that thing better. But that's a later stage thing. That's not like a customer interviews before. So that's the way to like do it for real. There's a way to cheat, which is you make the product for yourself, right? Which is what we did at Evernote. So in my first two companies before Evernote, we made products the first one was for e-commerce. The second one was a security company. So we made products for like large governments and banks. And we understood those needs because we had co-founders and people who deeply understood those markets. And we had to constantly think about, okay, how do we understand them? How do we like make sure we know what's right for the customer? When it came time to do Evernote, we were like, we are tired of asking what do the customer want. We like, screw what the customer wants. What if we ask, what do we want? And like, because we're the customer, so what is the product that we can build for us? For us, we are the customer. So that was Evernote. So Evernote went really fast because we were building it for us. There's all sorts of shortcomings to that as well, because it's cheating. It's like typing a cheat code in a video game. You don't get quite the satisfaction, but it does go much faster. For other projects at All Turtles, we're not building it for ourselves. For the other 8 or 9 projects we have, we're building it for other people because there's other people whose problems are much more worthwhile and worth solving than us. Like, we have relatively the male tech guys. There's like other people in the world that should have their problems solved. So for All Turtles, we're generally solving other people's problems, and we do that. We understand them by making sure that the founders we have for each project have like a deep expertise. But because it started as a joke, unintentionally, we never intended to make it a product until we raised a bunch of money and decided to make it a product. We're back to building it for ourselves because the joke was, for us. So the product is for us. So now, again, this is my second time in my life where I'm building something for myself, for ourselves. And that understanding of the customer just comes from, we're the customer. And again, now I'm remembering, I'm like, oh yeah, when you build for yourself, it's so much faster. I feel a little bit guilty about it, honestly, because I said before, okay, I'm done building things for myself. But it does go faster. So that's kind of the way to cheat. So when we talk to customers now at which, we're a year old, so we're starting to do that a good amount. What we do is we don't need to talk to them to understand what the problem is. We feel the problem acutely. We talk to them by giving them what we have and then observing them. How do you use it? Do you understand this? Do you not understand this? What's confusing? Explain to me how you think this works, that kind of stuff. So that's user testing, which is extremely important if you do it correctly. That's not, customer interviews. So again, sorry for the long answer, but I think this is like the central place where I see startups waste a huge amount of time.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Like you mentioned you mentioned Evernote that you like actually built this for yourself, and I know from like several like blog posts or somewhere else that there has been a time at Evernote where it was like you raised money and then you ran out of money but you managed to survive and even thrive from that point. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Because maybe it's like inspiring for young founders.
Yeah, so I think we had a very hard time raising money at Evernote in the beginning because we didn't know how to do it. We had a terrible pitch, and I was really bad at raising money, even though I'd done it, before in previous companies. But luckily, me and Stepan Pachikov, is brilliant Russian-American entrepreneur who had his own team. Like the two of us came together to make Evernote. We both had previous companies, previous exits, so we were able to fund. Initially, it was like literally friends and family and us and like friendly investors that we brought in. But we raised several $1 million that way and already had a pretty big team. But we had a very hard time raising more institutional money. Nobody in Silicon Valley would invest in us. It was tough. We finally got a term sheet for $10 million, pretty big round, from a European investor. And the legal structure was kind of messy because we had these two companies, mine and Stepan's, that kind of merged together. So it wasn't the traditional, very clean startup structure. That's actually my number one lesson, is like never do that again. Just like optimize for simplicity and structure. Don't do anything clever in structure. That was like a horrible mistake. So we got a term sheet for $10 million, but it took us about 6 months of due diligence to like clean up the structure, to make it all like super understandable to investors so they would invest. So 6 months, and we were running down to almost no cash, and we couldn't talk to anyone else because we'd signed a term sheet. We had about 3 weeks of cash left in the bank, and this was in 2008. And on the day that the funding was supposed to close, that we were supposed to get the money, on that day is the day in the fall of 2008 when the financial markets exploded.
The credit crunch.
Merrill Lynch went out of business literally that day. And the investor called us on the closing day and said that they're pulling out because they lost like 60% of the value of their fund in that one day. And of course I was panicked because we only had 3 weeks left of cash. And so I scrambled for a week, calling everyone. I knew no one would even return my phone calls. I couldn't get a single meeting. And then so I spent a week doing that, and then we only had 2 weeks of cash left. And I finally decided, okay, we're going to shut the company down because, we only have 2 weeks of cash. So I was sitting at night and I decided, okay, tomorrow morning, right now I'm going to close my laptop, go to sleep. It was like 3 a.m. Wake up tomorrow morning, go to the office, lay everyone off and close everything down because, we only had 2 weeks left. You can't like go to zero. You have to like pay final bills. I don't want to be sued afterwards. So I already decided tomorrow morning, closing the company down. And then right before closing my laptop at 3 a.m., I got an email. It was an email from some random guy in Sweden. And he said, hello, I'm a random guy in Sweden. And, I just want you to know that I downloaded Evernote and I've been using it and it's great. It's like changed my life. I really love it. So you'd like really improve my life. And I felt kind of better. I'm like, you like improve the life of one random guy from Sweden. And that's something. You should feel good about that. And then he went on to write, so I'm just writing to see if you need any investment. And I wrote back, I was like, why, yes, we do need investment. And, I hit send, and instead of going to sleep, I just stayed up. And a half hour later, I was on a Skype call with him. I almost said Zoom, but that was way before Zoom. It was Skype. Got on a Skype call with him. And 2 weeks later, he wired us $500,000. And we made that $500,000 stretch for, 6 months or so. And that was enough to finally get enough traction because we had just launched a product where then we could raise all sorts of money because like our numbers were so good. And so, yeah, he completely saved the company, and he wanted to stay anonymous. I've never actually said who he is, but this is very much a real person So the moral of that lesson is always answer emails from Swedes. Like this is the main thing that I learned.
Yeah, this is a super lovely story. Yeah, thanks for all the questions and answers. Thanks for the great story. Thanks that you joined here today. Thank you. If your audience needs try out, it's really cool. We're using it at Now Elements to pitch something. It's super fun. And love to stay in the loop how the product evolves. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.